Okay, so we finally reached our final session, and today is a very interesting and important topic. We're talking about how the brain works. And we all teach children around the age of 13 or 14 and over, around that age, and around that age till our age and beyond, pretty much the brain works the same way in lots of things. So whatever information we're going to have today applies to the children we teach and to ourselves as well. Educators are the only people whose job is to change the human brain every day. And when I say change, this is actually true, and we'll try to explain that as we go along in today's session. Whenever we're learning, like right now, changes happen in our brains. New connections are formed, physical connections are formed, and the information we gain is shaped and stored physically in our brains. So every day we learn or every day we teach, our brains actually change in shape and form and connections. It's not just theoretical, this is actually something that does happen in our brains. We're going to talk about two things today. We're going to talk about our brains, some information, very important information about our brains, and then our habits, how our teaching habits or learning habits can either become better by knowing how the brain works, or what we do to make learning worse based on the information that we're going to learn today as well. Number one, our brains. We'll talk about a few points here, and number one, how big is your brain? Brain size does not affect intelligence in any way. This is something that has been proven, even though there were some theories that said that if you have a smaller brain, then you may be more intelligent and vice versa. It really doesn't make a difference, and brain sizes of human beings are very similar to each other. Now, let's try to imagine how big our brains actually are. Okay, help me out. Do like this, please. Okay, you can leave your guns. Now, close your thumb like this, lock it in, fist, bring them together like this, cross these two fingers. Now look on top. This is how big your brain is, exactly. And this is how it looks from. These two crossed fingers show that the right part of the brain, the right half, controls the left part of the body. And the left half of the brain controls the right part of the body. And this is actually the size of our brains. The size of a normal human brain is about this one. The length of the brain, which will be here, is about 15 centimeters long. The size is about the size of two fists clenched together like we just did. And the weight of our brain is about 1.5 kilograms. So it's very small, very light. However, our brains have an infinite capacity for learning and storing information. It's not like a hard drive that will someday, sooner or later, run out of space. Our brains never run out of space. We can always learn. There is no limit to what we can learn and what we can understand. Our brains have many different definitions. One of them is that our brains are novelty seekers. Our brains seek novelty. The word novel means new. So novelty means something that is new or different. This is perhaps one of the most important characteristics of the brain, is that our brains always pay extra attention to what is novel, what is new, or what is different. Whenever we're in any environment, every day of our lives, the first thing we do, unintentionally, is scan everything around us. And anything that is different or new pops out right away, and our brains give full attention to what is new or what is different. So if something unexpected happens, like a loud noise, for example, we focus our attention on that noise right away, even if we don't need to, and we lose focus on what we're already doing. If we hear a loud noise coming from outside right now, we're all going to focus on that sound, and we're going to forget what we're doing for a moment. We focus our attention on that unexpected noise. So, if I have a predictable environment. An environment where everything in it is predictable. I know what's in it. Just like our classroom. The first time I entered this classroom, my brain scanned everything that is new. The posters, the colors, the people sitting down, the chairs, how comfortable the chairs are, how comfortable they're not, how cold it is, how hot it is, what colors there are, everything around me. My brain scanned all this. If it doesn't change, this environment becomes predictable. We all know what's going to happen next. We all know how it feels to be here. A predictable environment lowers the brain's interest in the outside world and focuses the brain within. So when I'm in an environment that is predictable, an environment that I am very familiar with, my brain stops paying attention to what is around me and focuses to what is happening inside the brain. What I'm reading, for example, what I'm learning, what I'm teaching. Now, this is very good for studying. Why? Because if I want to study, I want to focus on something I'm doing, I'd better sit in a predictable environment, a comfortable environment, where my brain will not be distracted by anything else and just focus on what I'm doing. But it's not that good. It's actually sometimes bad for learning. Because if my classroom is too predictable and too comfortable, it may become boring. So the teacher teaches the same way, using the same methods and the same routine every single day. Some students will get bored and will stop paying interest or paying attention. So what we want to do is vary our instruction, vary the ways that we teach, and try every now and then to introduce something new or something different in our classes. Because that's the first thing they're going to realize. For example, if in all of this page there is one spelling mistake, only one letter written wrong, most of you will be able to find out this wrong letter. Okay? Why? Because it is something that is different. So, every now and then I should do something that is different, something that makes my brain exactly energized. Last session I gave someone an application, and the application was printed on the opposite page. It was flipped. That's the first thing that she realized once she looked at the paper without reading even the words, that this shouldn't be like this, it should be like that. Okay, there's something wrong, there's something that's new, there's something that is different. I can implement this in my teaching, in the slides I use, in the worksheets I use, in the way I talk, in what I do during my lesson. And we're going to talk at the end of how to introduce novelty into my lessons. But just know that the brain is always looking for what is new or what is different. Our memory. And let's focus on this for a while. Now, we basically have three types of memories. There's something called the immediate memory, and something called working memory, and something called long-term memory or storage memory. Immediate memory and working memory are very, very similar. So for the purpose of this session, because we don't have that much time to go into the details of how memory works, we're just going to say that we have two types of memories. We have the working memory and we have the long-term memory. Working memory is like a desk. It's like my desk. And the long-term memory or the storage memory is like a file cabinet where I put everything that I want to store. Now, anything we are thinking of right now, or anything we're working on, or anything we're doing, uses our working memory. Our working memory has 3 inputs and 1 output and another small output. So we'll say 3 inputs and 2 outputs. What are the inputs? What comes into my working memory? Number 1, information that I retrieve from long-term memory, something I want to remember, a rule that I need to remember, a saying, a poem, the definition of a word. So I bring it from the long-term memory, from the storage, and I put it onto my desk in order to use it in what I'm doing right now. So this is number 1, retrieve. Information coming from long-term memory. Then we have 2 more inputs. Here in red, information from the environment. And information from the environment is huge, it's a lot. As we sit down somewhere, our brain is receiving information about the environment we're in. Is it cold or is it hot? Am I comfortable? Am I not? That rhymes. Am I safe or am I unsafe? Okay? What are the colors around me? Who's sitting next to me? Who's sitting far away? What is he wearing? What is she wearing? What is he saying? What is she saying? What are they whispering? Our brains are trying to collect all this information. So this is information that comes from the environment around us. Then we have thoughts from within our brains. Will I pass this test? Will I not pass this test? What if I finish early? What if I finish late? What am I going to do after I finish? This is so hard. Should I skip this question? Should I go to the next one? Do they understand what I'm saying? Or should I repeat it again? Now who am I going to ask? I forgot my lesson plan. What was the rule again? What am I going to do? Thoughts coming from inside my brain. And all this clutters my desk, my working memory. Now, since our working memory can only hold 7 distinct different pieces of information at a time, some of the information that is on my desk has to be lost because there's so much information at any given second coming into my working memory. There's the information that I retrieved that I really want to remember. There's information coming from the environment around me, and there's information coming from inside my brain. All of this is cluttering my desk. It's like putting paper over paper over paper over paper on your desk. Something has to fall down. So this is the first output, loss. Some of the things on my desk are going to be lost. Some of the things I'm working with right now are going to be lost. Another output of my information is this one, storing, where I've learned something and I want to now store it and put it in my working memory, long-term memory. So one more time. Working memory has 3 inputs. 1 is the information I take or retrieve. 2 is information from the environment. 3 is information coming from the brain. It has 2 outputs, one good and one bad. The good output is what I want to store in my long-term memory, what I want to remember. And the bad output is the loss that must happen at some point. Now, let's talk about this part here in more details. Varying ages have varying capacities of working memory. 14 years and over, we can usually remember 7 distinct pieces of information at a time. How does this affect our teaching? If I want to teach, how many planets are there? How many planets in the solar system? 9. Let's say 9. Okay? If I want to teach 4th graders, 3rd graders, who are younger than 14, they can only remember about 5 things at a time. I want to teach them the names of the 9 planets. If I try to teach them the names of the 9 planets at once, I'm going to have a very hard time, with some of them at least. But if I teach them the names of 5 planets first, then review these 5 planets, make sure they understand them and remember them, and then go and do the other 4, they're going to remember it much better. Now, for us and for our students who can remember 7 distinct pieces of information, how does that affect them? If I'm an English teacher and I want to teach them today 10 new words, 10 new vocabulary words, I don't try to teach them the 10 at once. I break them down into 5 and 5. I teach them 5, I have a worksheet on the 5, we have some kind of practice, there's a discussion, we make a little quiz or something. Now these 5 words are over, now we do another 5. So at once, we can only focus on 7 things, or remember 7 distinct pieces of information. Now what does distinct mean? It's different pieces of information. How? If I tell you, I'm going to tell you a number now and I want you to remember. Okay? The number is written from left to right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. How many numbers are these from 1 to 9? 9. But we can all remember them. Why? Because all we needed to remember were 2 things. 1, that it starts with the number 1, and 2, that it just goes until 9. Okay? So these are only 2 pieces of distinct information. But if the number is random, then the number of distinct pieces of information is based on the number of digits, because each one is random. Now, we're going to try something together. Make sure you all have blank paper right here, yeah, next to the one you have, and a pencil or a pen. Does anybody need a pencil or a pen? Okay, we're going to try something together. Okay, ready? Now, I want you to stare at the numbers below for exactly 7 seconds. Then I'm going to take them away. Now write it down. Okay? Now we're going to try this again. Now write it down.
Well, I got the first 7.
First 3.
Okay. Here's the first one. Okay, how many got it all right? Wow, everyone. Okay, great. Here's the second.
I got the first 3 right.
Okay. Anybody got the first 7 right?
The first 5.
5. The first 7.
The first 6.
The first 6. Anybody got more than the first 7? No. So we have the first 6, the first 7.
Only one wrong, number wrong. The 7.
Yes, of the 7. Exactly. So some got 6 out of 10 because this is 10. Some got 7 out of 10. Some got 5 out of 10. Some 3. Some maybe not at all. Those who got not at all, it's probably something that your brain was it's a trick your brain was playing with, because you already know that you're not going to be able to know more than 7. So you laughed and said that's impossible by the time you started to read the 7 seconds were over. So that's probably just a trick. But we should be able to remember 5, 6, or 7 of these 10. But we've all been able to remember the first 7 here. Now the point is, why are these distinct pieces of information? Because they're random numbers. You see, if I remove this 3 right here, how many digits do I have? 6. Now after the number 5, add the following digits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I have 11 digits, but you're probably going to remember. Because all you need to remember is the first 6, and then the afterwards it's 1 until 5. Okay? But each one here, they're all random. They're not consecutive numbers, there's no relationship between. That's why it's easier to remember a telephone number that has similar digits. If I'm going to remember something like 012, 1212, 353535, for example. That's easy, even though it's 10 digits. Now, when we try to memorize a phone number in order to call that number, so we look it up right here, and then we go grab our phones over there and call that number. We can probably remember this because it's in our working memory. But try to remember an hour later, you probably won't find it anymore because it didn't go into your long-term memory. Even though working memory can sometimes hold information for up to 24 hours. This is something very important we're going to talk about. So, what do I do? A telephone number here is usually 10 digits or 10 numbers long. So what we do unconsciously is we first look at the area code, at the 3 first numbers. This is 012 or 011 or 010. This represents only one piece of information. And then I memorize the 7 numbers afterwards. So it's only memorizing 7 or 8 distinct pieces of information. Now, have this phone number something easy that has consecutive numbers or repeated numbers, and that even makes it easier for me to remember. Yes, Ms.
I was just going to say that this test cannot really help because for myself, remembering all of the numbers, I do not remember numbers, not even one digit number. I can't remember it from one day to another, or from the morning to the afternoon.
Yes.
So I find that
it does not apply to everybody.
Yes.
Mrs. Magda told us before that she had a hard time remembering the names of students from the first day. So we are all different in what we remember. Some people have a photographic memory. They remember faces very well, but they forget names. Other people remember names very well, but forget faces, and so on. So there are differences between us. But basically, the information that we have is limited to this in our working memory. So for example, if Mrs. Magda, for example, has a photographic memory for people, she remembers faces very well, but she doesn't remember names and numbers very well. If you see 7 people next to each other, you'll probably be able to remember their 7 faces if we ask you something about them soon. But if you see 10, you're probably going to only remember 7 out of the 10 probably. So this is basically what we need. But of course, this is just to show that this is true for most of us, not for all of us. It differs from one person to the other. As we said, there are different types of learning styles, and there are the multiple intelligences that we talked about before. This makes differences, of course, between every person and the other. Now, before I move on to number 4, we said that the working memory can usually hold information for up to 24 hours. Up to 24 hours. Sometimes we can hold information up to 24 hours. That's why some students, before the exam, 1 hour before the exam, 2 hours before the exam, the night before the exam, they memorize some rules or some important information for the test. And they enter the test, they write this information, they're able to answer the test properly. But afterwards, after a day or two, they completely forgot what they prepared for the test. That's because they held all this in their working memory. The problem is, if I teach my students to do this, they're already entering the exam with a full working memory. And when they try to retrieve information to use on the rest of the test, something gets lost. They either won't be able to get this information, or what they memorized gets lost. So what they sometimes do is they write down the rules at the beginning of the test. On the first page of the test, as soon as time starts, they write down all the rules that they have memorized, clearing their working memory for something else to come in. Now what we do wrong as teachers is that we sometimes test information that we've taught in time under 24 hours. Meaning, I gave them something on Wednesday, the last class, the last lesson of the day, and I test them on Thursday, the first lesson in the morning. A lot of them will remember, but they haven't learned. It's still in their working memory. If you postpone this test till Sunday, a lot of them will not be able to solve the test. And sometimes we explain something today and give a quiz or a test on it right now and say, okay, now they've learned. That's not enough for you to know what they've learned during the same day or under 24 hours. If you want to make sure what they have learned and is in their long-term memory, you need to give them a test after more than 24 hours, or at least 24 hours. What gets in first? What type of information enters my working memory first? Okay? And think of your working memory as your conscious brain. What we all now know is happening in our brains. What you're thinking, what I'm thinking, what you're listening to, everything that's happening around you, your working memory. What gets in first? Number one, data affecting survival. Anything that affects my survival comes in first. So, if you're hungry, very hungry, and you're listening to the most interesting lecture in the world, what's going to happen first in your brain? I'm hungry. That's the number one thing you're going to be thinking about. It's going to be your number one concern. Thirst, same thing. Unsafe. If you're sitting in an open place, for example, you're having a very important discussion and you're afraid of dogs. And next to you there's this dog that's going and coming around next to your chair. You're not going to be able to focus on what's happening because you sense danger. So anything that affects my survival comes in first. Remember, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the first thing was biological and physiological needs, survival needs. If I don't fulfill this first, I can go to the next step. So this is what's going to happen first in my brain. Remember when we talked about students in classroom? If somebody has a problem with somebody else in the same classroom, if somebody's bullying someone, if there was a big fight between two people right before the class, they are not going to be able to focus on what you're trying to teach them. Because all the information from this problem that affects their survival is going to clutter their working brain first. Okay? Data generating emotions. Anything that generates my emotions comes in second. So if I'm very sad, I think about what makes me sad, or what made me sad. If I'm really, really happy and overly excited, I think about why I'm excited and why I'm happy, and I tend not to focus on what's happening in front of me. And third is data from new learning. Third. And as teachers, we want this to be the first thing. Now, there are two things we can do. As teachers, and then as students. As teachers, we need to try our best to make sure that the survival needs are met, as we said before. Make sure that their biological and physiological needs, their safety needs are met. Okay? Now, it does differ from by age. So, younger students, if you have someone who's like 5 years old and is extremely hungry, there is no way he's going to understand anything in the world. But if you're 15 years old, 16 years old, and you're hungry, you can overcome it a little bit. Okay? Older people are able to control themselves a little bit more when it comes to something like hunger. However, with older kids, teenagers especially, the emotional energy is very, very high. So if there's some kind of jealousy or sadness or excitement or something like that, it's usually very hard to solve. But we try as teachers to make sure that their survival needs and emotional needs are met before they can understand the information we have. As students, we should teach our students this. Okay? And I do this with my students. I teach them this. And I teach them something else very important, is that we can train our brains. This is not something that we have to live with our whole lives. This is how our brains work. But we can train our brains to work differently. That's why there are soldiers. That's why there's the army. What do these people do? They're in the face of dying, survival needs. They don't run away. They fight, and they know they're going to die, and they either win or die. How? By training. Okay? So we need to train our brains as students to accept this information first, and to block any survival or emotional information for now. And make a time, at break time or after school, where you just sit down and meditate and think about everything you want to think about. And just postpone everything till then, and now focus on the learning. And as we go along today, we're going to say how this can be achieved easily.
I have a question about that affecting survival. If kids are hungry in class and they won't concentrate, would it be okay if they eat in class while I'm explaining, or would that distract?
That depends on you and your students, of course. I personally think that if they eat something, if they drink more than eat, I think that's okay, because thirst is more of a survival need than hunger. So I would allow them to drink water, for example, only water. Maybe that would be a rule. You can only drink water during your lesson, nothing else. You can't have tea, you can't have coffee, you can't have juice, you can't, just water. If you want them to eat something, I don't know, that really depends on these students. If they're just going to make it something fun and they're not going to concentrate, then maybe you shouldn't. But sometimes there is a benefit. I personally don't think there's much of a problem for students to eat or drink in my classroom for a certain time under certain guidelines. Of course, but you're in a school, so if that's unacceptable at the school, then you'll have a problem. Maybe water would be, I think, would be the best rule. You can only drink water if you really need to. And it depends on your lesson, on your class. Like if I'm the lesson right after break, then no, you can't eat or drink. You can't even go to the bathroom because you just had half an hour break. You could have done that then. Okay, but if I'm like the last lesson of the day, then maybe I should have them drink water. What gets stored? Now, what we talked about up till now was our working memory. Okay, we talked about our working memory, that we can probably hold 7 pieces of distinct information at the same time, and that our working memory can hold things for up to 24 hours. And we talked about what enters our working memory first. First, things that have to do with survival, then things that have to do with emotions, and then new learning, but we can train our brains. Now, what gets stored? What enters the file cabinet? Because this is the ultimate goal of teachers. We want the information and the experiences that we teach them to enter their long-term memory. Because this is where they'll be able to retrieve this learning for the rest of their lives. Information that has sense and meaning is stored very, very easily. So as a teacher, I need to make sure that my students have sense and meaning of everything that I explain. Now, if it only makes sense, it is stored, but it takes a long time, it takes a lot of revision and repetition and practice. If it only has meaning, it gets stored, but it also takes some effort, even though meaning is a little bit more important than sense. However, if it has both sense and meaning, it gets stored very easily. Now, what is sense and what is meaning? Because they're both very similar. Now, I have them as 2 questions. If you remember them this way, I think you should be able to put sense and meaning into anything you explain. Sense means, what is it? For example, in this state, for example, you can get a driver's license when you're 16 years of age. But in the state right next to us, you can get a driver's license when you're 18 years of age. Okay? Now, this information makes sense to them. They know what it is, what the information is. This is the rule. Okay? Let's say something else for sense. Pi equals 3.14, 3.14. That's sense. So they know what it is, what it equals, what the definition is. Now meaning. Why is it that way? Why does the other state have an age limit of 18 while we have an age limit of 16, for example? Why? If you explain why, this information gets stored much more easily. because they know what it is and they know why it happens. So if I just say 18 there and 16 here, some of them may get mixed up. Okay, or they may forget the number, was it 18 or 19? But if I give them sense of it, the reason for these 2 extra years is because they have more accidents than we do, because they have more highways, faster speed limits, whatever. If I give them some kind of reason, then the meaning with the sense sticks in their long-term memory. The number pi, or pi equals 3.14. Why do I have to know it? So what? Because when we try to calculate the area of a circle, the rule says that the area of a circle equals pi times r squared. So if you don't know what pi equals, you're not going to be able to know the area of a circle. So now they know the meaning of it. Why is it important? Okay? Now, a lot of times, we as teachers, and we said this before, fail to give meaning to what we teach. By failing to answer one of the most popular questions they ask. Why do I need to learn this? Why is this important? What am I going to benefit from this? How am I going to use this in college? Okay? What am I going to do with this in my life? Okay? You teach French. Why do I need to know French? Why? I speak English. I speak Arabic. I don't plan on ever going to France. Why? You need to give them a reason. So, if I give sense, which is what we all do, we explain what something is, we need to add meaning to it to answer the questions why. Once you do, it's very easily stored in your memory.
I understand the meaning of sense, but can it be logical? Yeah, logical.
Yes, of course. Yes, it depends on what you're teaching. So yes, if it's just a rule, then it's sense. If you have to understand it in some way, then it's the logic of what you're explaining. Now, another definition of our brains. We have 2 brains. Physically, we just have 1 brain. Okay? But we have 2 brains when it comes to how our brain reacts. This is very important. And one of the most important things that I think you should teach your students. Again, I usually do this before the test. Now, all the information that enters our brain, forget about memory now, and think of the brain as 2 different types of brains, must first enter a filter called the RAS, Reticular Activating System, followed by something called the amygdala. Just think of them as 2 filters, or 1 filter. Something that lets some things in this way, or that way. Okay? So someone standing on the door to our brains, and either having the information enter this way, or enter this way. This way, it goes to what we call the reactive brain. This way, it will go to what we call the thinking brain. And as learners, or test takers, we need to use our thinking brains. But as human beings, we need to use both. Our reactive brain is extremely important. Now, what's the difference? If the information enters while you are in a state of stress, danger, or boredom, it will go to the reactive brain. So, I'm on a test now. And during the test, I need to be using my thinking brain. I definitely need to be using my thinking brain. But I'm under so much stress because I didn't study well, I didn't sleep well, my parents expect me to do excellent on the test. The person next to me is breaking down and crying, stress everywhere. Unconsciously, I'm using my reactive brain during the test. I'm not performing as well as I should. Now, this information can keep going back and forth, some to the reactive, some to the thinking, and back and forth, back and forth. But the point is, I'm using this a lot, which wastes time. Or I sense danger. And this is the main purpose of why God created us with a reactive brain. Because when we sense danger, we don't have time to think about what to do. Okay? If I'm walking down the street and all of a sudden I see a rock coming that's going to hit me in the face, for example, I change, I duck, I go down, I put my hands. This is reactive. Okay? If you're trying to cross a busy street, how do you go between the cars? Reactive brain. You don't keep on thinking and calculating exactly what you're going to do, or else it affects our survival. So the reactive brain works when there's stress, danger, or boredom. Now, danger, when you talk in the classroom, again, it may not be physical danger. There's nobody who's going to hit us during the lesson. There are no rocks falling, no cars passing by. But there is the danger that I feel from bullying, from person who's in front of me, who's looking me in the eye, for example, telling me, in other words, during break time, you're going to see what's going to happen to you. That's why one of the worst ways to seat students is the U shape. You know how you can seat them as a U shape? It's good because they can all see the teacher, and the teacher has a large space to walk. However, when you seat students like this, in the U shape, there are always two students facing each other. And if there is some kind of tension between these two, and they look each other in the eyes during your lesson, right away they sense the danger and go to their reactive brains. So that's why in a lot of classroom settings we have everybody looking to the teacher. So they avoid any two students looking at each other, sparking this kind of danger or jealousy or any kind of danger that they may feel. Bored. If you're bored, your brain works in reactive mode. Okay? If you cannot find interest in what is happening, your brain works in the reactive mode. However, it is you as a student, that's what I tell my students, who is responsible for this. It's not the teacher. Why? Because you came in, and at a certain point during my lesson, you feel that it's boring. So you use your reactive brain. Okay? Now, while you're using your reactive brain, I may say something that's interesting, or you're still using this. You're not going to notice it, because you've already decided that it is boring. So you've decided that this part is boring, okay, so the rest of the lesson is boring. So I'm just going to be bored. However, I can control this and say, well, this part is boring, okay, now wake up, focus again, maybe it's interesting, try to get out of the cycle of being bored. Because once you're bored, you say, I'm bored, you keep on becoming bored until you just use your reactive brain the whole time. What does the reactive brain do? The reactive brain is very, very, very primitive and very, very simple, and is used for our survival and is used for the survival of all types of animals. The reactive brain can only do three things. It can either fight, go into flight, or freeze. Fight, flight, freeze. That's the only thing our brains can do when they're in reactive mode. Fight means to fight back. Okay? If somebody punches you in the face, unintentionally you punch back. Okay? You fight. If a teacher is disrespecting a student and yelling and shouting, unintentionally, that student may yell back and shout back because he's in fight mode. His body, his brain, everything is fighting back. If you're walking down the street and somebody yells at you, you're going to yell back, even if that's not what you usually do. Until you realize what you're doing is wrong, then you go back to your thinking. So that is fight. Then there is flight. And flight is either physical or mental. Physical flight means to run away. Okay, if you sense some kind of danger somewhere, you run away from the danger. If there's a huge fire in front of you, you don't go stand by the fire and think what you're supposed to do. You run away. And then there's the mental flight, which happens with a lot of our students during our lessons and during their tests, where they daydream, they fly, they go to another world. They decide to think about something else that is more interesting than what they are learning. And then there is freeze mode, which happens to everybody and happens to most of us at some point, where we simply freeze, just like a computer freezes. We don't understand anything, we're not thinking about anything, we don't know where we are, what's been said, what should be done, we simply just freeze, a state of being frozen. These are the three things that our reactive brains can do. They can either fight back, they can fly away, drift away, or they can freeze. Now, if you have students who are not paying attention, you need to notice that they have one of these three things, okay? And by telling them, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention, you're not doing anything. You're just increasing their stress. If you tell them, if you don't pay attention, I'm going to punish you, you're increasing their sense of danger. If you sense that they don't understand, and so you repeat the same thing the same way, you increase their sense of boredom. So instead of punishing them for not paying attention, danger, instead of yelling and insisting that they pay attention, increasing their stress, instead of doing the same thing the same way, increasing their boredom, you need to try to use one of the three things here so you can have their RAS and amygdala wake up and drift all the information to the other side. So how do we go to the good side, not the dark side? We can do this having three things: interest, novelty, relevance. Okay? Now, novelty, we already talked about this. there's something new or something different, our brains react to this right away. Okay, this is very important. So, by just doing something different, I'm going to have the attention of everybody else in the classroom. How? Now, I'm talking, I realize some of you are not paying attention. Okay? So during my lesson, all I do is I just continue what I'm doing like this. Everybody pays attention to what I'm doing, and everybody looks at it. Why? Because it is something that is different, something that is novel.
I get down on my knees.
Get down on your knees, exactly, okay? Jump on the desk. Change your tone of voice. Change the way you walk, the way you talk. Do something different, okay? Tell a joke. We're going to talk about humor and jokes in a little while. What about interest developments? These are the two most important things that we learn by. If it's something that we're interested in, you don't need to do anything as a teacher. If you have a student who's interested in physics, who loves physics, and you're a physics teacher, you just go in, say whatever you want to say, they're going to give you their full attention. They're going to do extra homework, they're going to do extra work because they love what you are explaining. That's why a lot of our students sit down in the classroom, they can't sit down for more than 5 minutes. They need to go up, they need to do things they don't understand, they don't focus, they don't concentrate. But at home, they can stay in front of their Xbox or PlayStation, whatever, for 5-6 hours at a time without moving. Why? Because this is something of interest to me. So by putting things that interest my students into my lesson plan, I'm able to grab their attention somewhat. What if your subject or the unit or the chapter or the topic you're talking about today is simply not interesting, and you can't find any way of giving them interest? For example, like I said a little while ago, French. Somebody who has no interest in the world to learn a new language, does not plan on traveling anywhere in the world that speaks French, and sees no benefit for learning French at all. Then you need to give them relevance. Relevance means I need to know that this thing that I'm learning is relevant to me, is important to me. So let's say, for example, you have a math test, and you hate math. There's no interest in math. And your math teacher does not use novelty in the lesson. He doesn't do anything new, it's very boring. As a parent or as a teacher, not teaching math, any other teacher, you would tell your students, well, you need to be convinced that math is relevant to you. Why? First of all, it's relevant for you in school, because math is a major subject. There's like 10% of your overall grade is on math, and if you don't do well on math, there's no way you're going to enter whatever college that you want to enter. You want to be a doctor, why do I need to learn math? Well, if you don't score high on math, you're not going to be able to study medicine, for example. Math is very important to you in the rest of your life. You're going to be an engineer. You're going to have a lot of math in engineering. If you don't understand math now, you're going to have a very hard time afterwards. Have them understand that this is relevant to them, even if they don't like it. Okay? That's why we do work that we don't like. Why do people work? Some people work in professions that they don't like because they need to make a living. They need to earn money because it is relevant. Now, a good teacher, a super teacher, should be able to introduce all three things within the lesson. Make it interesting to their students. Use novelty, use new and different things throughout the lesson. And finally, make sure that they understand how this is important for them, how this is relevant to them. Once we do that, we are using our thinking brains and learning finally occurs. Okay? Now we're going to talk about our habits. First, we talked about our brains, how they work in terms of memory, in terms of the two types of brains we have, the reactive brain and the thinking brain, and how we can control what enters our brains first in terms of survival, emotions, and then learning. Our habits. When we talk about our habits, some may be good and some may be bad, and some may just be based on what we're going to learn today. Emotions and learning. Now, sometimes we have people who say, decide, but don't use your heart, use your brain. Okay? Think using your heart, your brain, sorry, not your heart. Our hearts do not think. It's our brain. Our brain thinks, only our brain. But when we say, use your brain, not your heart, we mean don't use your emotions. But whether we like it or not, the brain, even though this is not what is popularly known, is extremely, extremely emotional. And all our emotions are from our brains, not from our hearts. Emotions and learning. Emotions affect us in learning two ways. One, the environment around us, and two, the content, what we are learning. the math, the English, the physics, the science, the French. Okay? The environment. If it is positive, if we have a positive climate, an emotionally positive climate, an emotionally positive environment, where we have high expectations, where we don't have peer pressure, where we don't have fear of bullying, where there's no jealousy, where there is respect. Everything we've talked about from the beginning of our lessons. When a student is sitting in an environment that is positive, this releases in our blood something called endorphins, chemicals called endorphins. These endorphins reach the brain and have a very, very, very good effect on the brain by having it focus, improving focus. So when I'm in an environment that is safe, an environment that is comfortable, an environment that is positive, endorphins are released into my blood, go to my brain, and increase my focus. So I have to make my classroom as comfortable and positive as possible. That's why if you give a student a practice test to do at home, and then give him another test to do at school, he'll probably do better at the one at home, because the climate he has at home is better. For most students, some have very bad climates at home or very bad environments. But for most students, they are sitting in a place where they are used to. They're alone, they're not afraid of anything or anyone. They're wearing comfortable clothes, okay? They're sitting in a place where they choose, not where you choose for them. And this makes it a positive climate where they can focus more. Whereas, if your environment or climate is negative, this releases something called cortisol. And cortisol in my blood raises my anxiety levels. In other words, raises my stress. And when I'm more stressed, do I use my thinking brain or my reactive brain? My reactive. So the environment around me, my emotions towards the environment around me, really makes a difference. That's why we as people, as adults, when we, for example, choose a restaurant to go and have lunch at, we choose something that is comfortable, something where we like the environment. It's not only about the food, it's about everything else. We feel comfortable there because these endorphins make us happy. Endorphins give you something called a sense of euphoria, a sense of happiness and content and focus. Whereas if you go somewhere where you do not feel comfortable, even if they have the best food, you're not going to be happy because your anxiety levels will be very high. Your anxiety level will be very high. Second comes the emotions related to the content. Okay? Now let me try something here. I don't think it's going to work. Let me just try. Remember when we talked the session before last about the video we watched where the teacher was trying to tell them to write a persuasive essay? And then the following time, I told you if she should have started with some kind of emotional story about the girl who's going to die. Does anyone remember the name I used?
Emma.
Why did you remember her name? 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. Why? It makes no relevance to you. It's of no interest. There is no such girl called Emma who's going to die. It's something I made up and you know it. But why do we still have it here? Because it was connected to our emotions. Exactly. So the best way to make our students remember something is by connecting it emotionally in their brains. Now this could be something real, by teaching them something real using emotions. Or you can make up the emotions. You can scream and yell the rules. Okay? Let's say you grab one of your students like this and you shout and say pi equals 3.14. He's never going to forget it, even though he shouldn't do that. But what I'm saying is, because it's going to be related to the emotions that I have, whether positive or negative, I'm always going to remember. We remember information that is connected to our emotions. Stop for a moment and tell me, up till now, as teachers, what can we do so that we know that the information we are teaching goes to the thinking brain and is connected or stored in long storage till now? What do you think? Any ideas?
We make it interesting.
Make it interesting.
Make it safe.
Have the environment being proper and safe. Related to emotions. Related to me, interesting. New, novel. So these 5 things we can do up till now. We can introduce things that are new and different. We can make our environment safe, comfortable. We can make it interesting, and we can make it relevant, where it makes sense to me. And we can give the information 2 things. What were they? Sense
and meaning.
Meaning. Sense means what it is, and meaning means why it's that way, or why do I need to know. Now, when we teach, whether we like it or not, the brains of our students experience something called prime time and something called downtime. Prime time is when our brains are learning best. And downtime is when our brains are learning the worst. Prime time increases when we have shorter learning episodes. Okay? So giving the math teacher 3 running lessons is not a good idea. Because the longer the learning episode, the more downtime you have. However, the learning episode is something that you control as a teacher. So your class may be 40 minutes long, 80 minutes long, 120 minutes long, but you can still control the learning episodes, and I'm going to say how. Always make your teaching episodes as short as possible. And a teaching episode is the time where you teach. This is your teaching episode, okay? And there's been a lot of research done. You can look it up. You're going to find a lot of research done on this, a lot of experiments. And this is a very typical result. If you have a 20-minute learning episode, 18 minutes of these 20 are prime time, and only 2 minutes are lost in downtime. Meaning that the prime time learning in a 20-minute episode is how much percent? 90%. However, if you have a 40-minute learning episode, only 30 minutes are prime time, and 10 minutes are lost. And 10 minutes means 75% prime time. So do you want your students to learn 90% of what you're saying, or 75%? 90%. So make your learning episodes short. Now let's say our typical lesson time or classroom time is 40 minutes, correct? In the 40 minutes, I should not teach one thing for more than 20 minutes. Now, what if I need to teach a lot of things? I don't have time to just teach for 20 minutes and then the other 20 minutes do another activity. I need to separate this 20 minutes from the other 20 minutes. So word for 20 minutes, and then between them, you can just separate them even by 30 seconds. By telling a joke, by having some kind of discussion, by reverting to something else and then going back, by just getting the brain unfocused for a little bit and then back unfocused and teach the new thing that you want. Same thing when we teach our students how to study. It doesn't make sense for them to stay in their rooms and study for 5 hours at once without taking any breaks. And the break doesn't have to mean go do something fun. Break can simply be shut your eyes for 10 seconds, count till 10. Stand up and just walk back and forth and then continue again. Break down your learning or your teaching episodes into 20-minute intervals. This guarantees that at least 90% of what you're learning or teaching is in prime time, where only 10% is downtime. Something we have discussed before, we didn't say the name of the term, but we did say something about it. Primacy-Recency Effect. What the Primacy-Recency Effect says is that we remember best that which comes first, then that which comes last. So the two most things that we remember of any learning episode, any 20 minutes of teaching, for example, are the first thing that comes and the last thing. Now, some people argue and say, yes, we remember the last thing because it is the last thing. It's in our working memory. No, you remember even better than the last thing, the first thing. So that has nothing to do with recency. That's why it's called primacy-recency. Primacy means it's the primary thing, the first thing, and recency, the most recent. And we remember the least, that which comes just after the middle. And here is a major drawback of a lot of our lesson plans. We teach the most important thing that we want to teach during the middle of our lesson. And this is the most thing that students forget. They remember the beginning, and they remember the end, and they tend not to remember new information given just right after the middle of your lesson. So, when I enter my classroom, I have 40 minutes. Let's say I spend the first 10 minutes taking attendance, collecting homework, distributing papers, revising what we did last time. And then, in the middle of the lesson, I explain the new information. And then, at the end of the lesson, I give them some late homework to do or something we needed to do and forgot to do, or I have discussions with them, or I give them free time. There's no new learning that occurs, because what you gave them in the middle of the lesson isn't that beneficial. Now, here comes a trick that we play on ourselves. At the end of this lesson, that they did not really understand anything yet because it was in the middle, their brains weren't really working that well, we give them a test, a quiz. And they all do very well in the quiz. So we say, okay, I'm perfect, it's done. But remember, everything they have put in the quiz comes from their working memory, because it's only been a few minutes. Okay? But if you test them the day after tomorrow, they're not going to remember anything that you said. Whereas the beginning and the end of the lesson are going to be remembered. And think of it as a movie. When you see a movie next time, think of what are the two most things that you remember about the movie. The beginning of the movie and how the movie ended. Now if we talk about the middle of the movie, we may not really all be on the same track when it comes to the details. What happened exactly? You're going to say something, I'm going to say something. Really, I didn't notice this because it's in the middle of the movie. Now, unless what happened in the middle of the movie, which is the time that our brains work worst, or remember worst, was something that has relevance, or interest, or novelty, in a way that it made me remember this. So as a teacher, I can use all of this together. Try to put the most important information at the beginning and at the end. What if you have to do something important in the middle? Make sure you add to it novelty, interest, or relevance, so that they focus more on it. Because you know that now they don't have that much brain work. Okay? So basically, anything I say at the beginning of the lesson will probably be remembered. Raise your hands here, please, if you remember what we did with our fists and talked about the size of the brain. Everybody remembers it, because it's the first thing we did. Okay? And tomorrow, you're all going to remember this part. And next week, you're all going to remember this part. You may, however, forget something we said today in the middle of the lesson. Okay? But you may remember what I said when I stood on the chair. Why? Because there was novelty. So a teacher should be able to introduce novelty, relevance, interest, as well as make note of what time this is being explained and how long the learning episodes are to maximize the efficiency of what you are teaching. This means that we should gain information at the beginning of the learning episode and reinforce that information at the end of the learning episode. So, introduce new information at the beginning, summarize it, and revise it at the end to make sure that it's very, very strong. What about the middle? What should we do? Sleep? What we're talking about here is the brain gaining information, not practicing information. The brain has perfect ability to practice information in the middle of the lesson. So what should I do in the middle? Practice. Okay? Because some people think that we're useless in the middle of the lesson. No, that's not true. We learn during the middle of the lesson.
This is the time for controlled practice.
Exactly. This is the time for controlled practice, where we discuss something together, where we give them worksheets to do individually or in groups, and I control what is happening, and I look over them and I help them in the middle. So beginning, introduce, in the middle, give them this practice, at the end, summarize. Now, when am I going to collect the homework? When am I going to mark the papers? When am I going to take attendance? When they're doing their work. When they have something to do, I do this. I don't waste time at the beginning doing something when they are learning best. I don't want them to go home remembering who was absent for my attendance list, or remembering the grades I gave. I want them to remember this. I want them to remember what I am teaching. So use the middle of the learning episode for practice. Okay?